All right, session number 5, I think. At this point, I've lost count. So I've done all of the sessions for our first ever International MBA Day. If you're just joining us, welcome. We are here with current students. Gemlin is a recent alum, so still counts as current student. We are going to talk about finances. I'm going to ask all of them their deeply personal questions about how they manage their money, but also how they plan on paying back insane six-figure student loans. So my name is Shovik. I've been around GMAT Club forever. I've introed myself a bunch in the past. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to start with our panelists. I'm going to go reverse clockwise. So Amrit, I'll start with you, then Karan, and then I'll go to you, Jamlan. Amrit, go for it. I think, sorry, before you go, three things. Number one, what did you do before your MBA? Number two, what career choices you're pursuing in your MBA? And number three, what percentage of your total cost of attendance are you trying to finance? And what's your plan to get there?
Sure, thanks, Shovik. Happy to be here. GMAT Club was super supportive in my journey as well, so happy to pay it forward. Before Booth, I was in the Indian Air Force, was flying planes for 11 and a half years. Decided to transition and get an MBA with an eye on investment banking. Hopefully, that's what I'll keep doing after school. Definitely will help pay off those loans that I have. And in my case, it's 60 to 65% that I have funded using a loan, and the remainder has been from my own money and then also the scholarship that Booth is kind enough to give me.
Awesome. Thanks, Amrit. What about you, Karan?
Hey, so my name is Karan. I am calling in from Evanston, Northwestern Kellogg. Class of 25. I did analytics and modeling in the semiconductor industry before coming to Kellogg. I am also planning to pivot into investment banking, so that's what I'm recruiting for. That's where I hope to intern next year. I was not offered any scholarship, but I am funding about 80% of my cost of attendance through the Northwestern loan, and I can talk more about that as we dive deeper. Yeah.
Awesome. How are you, Jamlin?
Hi, so I'm Gemilin. Call me Gem. And before INSEAD, I was in finance. So I was in Asian Development Bank as part of private equity portfolio management. I wanted to pivot to consulting, and that's what happened. So right now I'm in consulting, a recent graduate, and I was able to get a scholarship. So I did. It's a combination of personal and family savings to support 30 to 40%.
Awesome. That sounds great. So I'm gonna pivot to like talking a little bit about my situation and then maybe from a baseline. And then we can talk a little bit about what your plans are, right? So I went to Michigan back in 2018. I funded about 75% of my cost of attendance with a loan from Prodigy at I think somewhere between 8 to 9% APR, which back then seemed very expensive. We are kind of back to those rates in the middle. It kind of dropped down a little bit. Yeah, so my plan was aggressively pay back loans as soon as I can after my MBA. And then, I joined tech right after my MBA, and I finished. So I had two loans, one for my first year and one for my second year. I was able to pay back, and both of them were, it was kind of like a 60-40 split. I think I was able to pay back my first year loan within maybe 2 years. And I paid over minimums. I paid back fairly aggressively. And then I became like a capitalist. So now I refinanced my second loan at a much lower interest rate that was fixed. I think it's close to like between 4 to 5%. So now I'm only paying the minimums, and I don't plan on paying it away. I think it's like a 5 year fixed. So I'll just keep paying the minimum till like 5 years. So that was kind of like my plan. They definitely changed. I was very much like Dave Ramsey, like be as debt free as you can, the soonest you can. But that kind of has changed for me. So I'm curious. Maybe I'll start with you, Karan. I'm curious about what your plans are in paying back your loan, or how frugal you have to be to pay back your loans.
Yeah, I think this journey starts a little before you start your MBA, right? I mean, once you're admitted, you have your cost of attendance in hand, and then you kind of start working with the university, and you start looking out as well about the kind of financing options that you have. I took the Northwestern loan because it was the cheapest option available to me. I mean, I came in as an international with no co-signer, uh,
Right.
and in that situations, in situations like that, the interest rates go way up from other private providers like Prodigy, Discover, or even loans in India are where at that time hovering around 13-ish%. So Northwestern loan was the best option available to me. I got it at an interest rate of about 6.5%, which I believe is low given the way
It's
interest
pretty
rates are rising up. Historically it has been at 4.5%, but then last year, because interest rates went up, the loan interest rate also went up by a bit. So like I said, 80% of my loan is financed through the Northwestern loan. The process was very seamless. I think you just have to fill in a couple of forms, and in fact, if you do have a cosigner, by the way, you can get your interest rates reduced a bit as well. So you basically cut out on the origination fees of about 4% if you do have an interest, if you do have a cosigner as an international. Yeah, post my MBA, really looking forward to paying it back as soon as possible. Just like you, Shovik, trying to be as frugal as I can right now, but also making sure that I don't miss out on the experiences that I really want to be a part of at Kellogg. Because I mean, you only do an MBA once, so trying to do things that I really want to do, but also making sure that I don't spend money on everything.
Yeah, I mean, I think that kind of makes sense. I was talking to a few other current students right before me, and I was talking about like how just having that loan made me take somewhat better decisions. Like I would definitely not cut down on like a career trek in Seattle or like the Bay Area, right?
Exactly.
But I felt more comfortable having a decision taken for me that no, I'm not going to go to Japan on like a 4 week notice to chill in fall break. So I think some of that decision was well made for me. Jem, how was that for INSEAD? Was that a similar process? What were some of the decisions that you had to go through while financing your cost of attendance?
Yeah, so definitely similar to Quran. It actually happens before you're even admitted. That's what happened to me. So I spoke to a lot of Filipinos who actually attended NCAD and asked them like how they were able to finance, how long did it take for them to pay off their loans? Because at that time I already know that I would take a loan. I just don't know how much it would be. So I spoke to a lot of people just to give me that sense on if I have the capacity emotionally and financially to take out a loan. So that was the process for me. And it's good to hear that people were able to pay it back in like within 5 years or uh, earlier than they thought. So that was a good sign for me. And so that also helps in decision making, as you mentioned, maximizing your MBA, meaning not spending everything in all the things because there are so many things going on, but really trying to prioritize the things so that you know what to spend on where you can actually extract value. I think that's very important. And yeah, you have to make those decisions early on during MBA and even afterwards what career you take. You have to take into consideration how long it will take for you to pay off the loan.
Jem, a quick question. Are you planning to work in Europe or back in Asia or in the US?
It's always been so it was a long journey coming to the decision, but I'm actually working right now in my home country, Philippines. And I just started working, so I was able to pivot to consulting. And yeah, so it was a very long way for me to actually get to this decision,
Gotcha,
taking
gotcha. No,
into
I'm sure.
consideration the loan as well.
Right. No, I was gonna say that if you're in the US, it just makes it a slightly easier to pay off your loans because you just make more money if you're in the US, even if you're doing the same job in the same company. Um, cool. Amrit, I am curious. I'm gonna ask you the same question, but slightly differently. But I'm curious, how has paying back your loan influenced your career decision? You mentioned you wanted to get into finance. Is that right?
Yes, I did, and investment banking more specifically. And my ability to pay off my loan has not influenced my decision whatsoever. Like, um, if I had to go down the entrepreneurial route, I would have still done it. It's just been a passive interest of mine for a long time, made a lot of sense um, to go down that route. So it's kind of like an icing on the cake, to be honest, that you do have an ability to pay off more aggressively. And Shavik, honestly, for me, like I'd love to connect with you offline to get some pointers on how on your payoff strategy, which sounded like pretty amazing. But no, it did not influence my plans, and I'm happy to chat into my experience, like how I've secured my funding as well.
Yeah, no, I'd be absolutely down to do that. By the way, just for like maybe for Jam, but for others as well. I think I'm like 5 years out of like 4 years out of school. Most of my international friends, I think as an international student, you either get into like consulting, tech, or finance. Like those are like the typical three. Like I think some of my friends did have some non-traditional paths, but most of them stuck to those three. And for those three, like unless something like deeply unforeseen happens to you, like a layoff or something like that, which can be kind of like an extinction event, but not really. I think if those things don't happen, it's fairly easy to pay off your loans within like 3 to 4 years, as long as you're not like buying a house or buying like a 911 right after grad school. I think if you're making decent decisions, I think you are fine. um, I'm curious on like, because I asked you this question, Amrit. If you were like, I think as an immigrant, there are more unpredictable things that can happen to you, right? Like 15 minutes from now, I'm going to talk to an immigration lawyer who is going to walk through like H1Bs and OPT and all of that stuff, right? If you had to go back to like India, for example, I think for the most part you'd be okay. But if you had to go back to India and you had this like, I think Jem had a bunch of scholarships and it was a 1 year program, so her living expenses were relatively lower than you two. But if you guys had to go back to India and you had like a 200K loan, how would that impact your life choices, you think? Like I'm going to ask you, Karan, like, is that even like, would you be very disappointed? Would that be totally okay? You accounted for it in your decision making. What would that be like?
I think I did account for that. Like you mentioned, that there's nothing that can be certain about life, and anything can happen after your MBA. So I did account for a possibility of going back to India and working there. Uh, Having said that, as an Indian, you do get to work on parallel revenue streams, and that's something that I plan to leverage as well back in India. But I did account for some savings as a backup, uh,
Sure.
just to make sure that in case nothing goes my way, I do have some backup to at least pay back the initial amount of my loan. Uh, as as with most of you, I guess the payment starts only 6 months after I graduate, so there is I did account for that leeway as well in terms of
Right.
paying back my money. And yeah, and apart from that, it's just making sure that there's some backup that you have in mind, and also some ideas of what kind of parallel revenue streams you can generate when you're back in India.
Right. No, that makes total sense. I think Augustina asks a question: if you need 3 to 4 years to pay off your loan, how can you stay as long in the US in order to be able to pay it? I mean, I think a variety of ways. Uh, I would say 3 to 4 years. Like if you are like Amrit and Karan here, I think Gem had the generous scholarships. But even if you consider a middle ground between Gem and Karan, for example, where you are paying off about 70% of your cost of attendance in loans, if you get into like consulting or investment banking or tech, and your total comp is somewhere in the range of like, just gonna make some wild guesses here, anywhere between 250 to $300,000, which is the case. You'd be able to pay off your loans within like 2 years if you are really frugal, right? Most schools, I mean, Booth and Kellogg for sure but most schools would offer you a STEM OPT, which would mean that you can at least work in the US for 3 years, and then you can apply for H-1B and hope things work out. I don't really know. It's still a lottery. But Jem, what were some of the, you mentioned like going back to the Philippines has been a tough decision for you. It's totally okay if you can't share the detail, but I'm curious on what was the financial impact or the considerations of making that decision. Because both Karan and Amrit is like, yeah, I mean, it's okay if I have to go back to India, but well, it would really help if I don't have to, right? So walk us through your decision making there.
Sure. Okay. So definitely, when I started INSEAD, to be very frank, I was looking to actually move to a different country where the pay is higher. So but then when I was actually recruiting, you see the numbers, you see the compensation package across, right? Because people are applying in different regions, so you would be able to compare. So what I did is to first consider how much is the pay in that region, what is the how much is the compensation in that specific region, in that specific industry, and then compare the actual expenses I have. So the good thing about staying back home is that your expenses is lower. And considering that, I'm in the Philippines, it's a developing country, so the expenses are, the standards of living wouldn't be that high. And then you compare that to a country that's more developed, of course, the standard of living is going to be higher. So I did a comparison of what my life, like the same life that I live in a different country and the same life that I live in the Philippines, and net all of the expenses with the compensation that I would get. And that's basically how I decided that it actually is okay that I would still be able to pay my loans if I'm here in the Philippines. And again, I have my partner is here and my whole family is here. So that's another advantage of staying back home. And I was able to pivot to consulting, which also helps a lot. Because aside from the passion, it's also the compensation.
Makes sense. I think, by the way, I totally agree with consulting specifically because, like, I have had friends who moved back to either Japan or Hong Kong or even Taiwan to do consulting. I mean, sure, their base pay is a little bit lower, but it's a lot less lower than the cost of living delta. So I totally see that. I think question for you, Amrit. We actually haven't talked about visa, immigration, and stuff like that. Does that ever account in the financial model that you're building of your loan repayment? How do you adjust for that risk?
100%. And like you correctly mentioned, like for me and Karan, we both have the STEM OPT. So that just means that you have 3 years post-graduation in the US, which is super helpful. And I accounted for that. I worked with a rather humble figure of like 150 net. Like if I was just making that, what do I look like 3 years and I don't get an H-1B?
Right.
And like there are more layers to this discussion, and the applicants that I do speak to, I do encourage them to think through, you don't get an H-1B, and let's say your STEM runs out, whether it's 1 year or 3 years, you go back to your home country or another region, like does your school have recognition in those areas? Because if it doesn't, then you're playing a huge gamble here, right? At least that was how I saw it. So it was very important for me, even when I was applying, thinking through all of those things. And there's so many layers to this discussion, right, Shovik? Like, is your loan originated in US dollars? Well, if it has, or like any other stronger currency than, let's say, the INR, then you better be earning in the stronger currency or an equivalently strong currency, because then you're getting the bachelor of the stick, But if you originated your loan in, let's say, Indian rupees, and the US dollar continues to get stronger over time, and you're in the US, well, then it's favorable for you from both ends. So like you have to think through those things, right? Like, what's my loan?
Yeah.
Like, is it a variable? Is it a fixed? Is it originated in US dollars? Is it related to the SOFR? What could that potentially look like? What does the average salary in potentially my backup industry look like if whatever you're going for, consulting, banking, doesn't work out? So there's quite a bit to that, and I would encourage people to think through all of those things and start to layer in their worst case scenarios. And if that still makes sense, then like go for it.
Yeah, I think that makes total sense. Having different scenarios for your payback strategy is always going to be super, super helpful. Cool. I want to mention a couple of things, right? Number one, if you are looking for an MBA financing strategy, Prodigy Finance is what I used. They are generally pretty good with giving you an estimate with very little information, and you can sign up to GMAT Club and get like $500 back, which is very nice. The second thing that I would mention is right after this one, we are doing a session with someone who specializes in immigration law, talking about STEM OPT, H-1B, and some other alternative to H-1B arrangements, which I personally took advantage of in the last 6 months. So I think that's going to be a really cool session. So feel free to join us there. But lastly, I want to ask the three of you, we have like maybe 2 to 3 minutes left. Jem, I'll start with you. If you had one advice for someone who is taking out a massive loan and all like rose tinted glasses, right? They're gonna, make millions of dollars immediately after MBA. If you had one piece of advice for them, what would you say?
Sure. So it's all about planning for me. Speak to a lot of people, speak to people that have the similar background. Because if you're thinking that you'll, end up in one place or end up in this industry, you have to make sure that it's possible. So the probability is really by talking to different to people that have similar background and then in different years, let's say in different an INSEAD 23D for INSEAD 22J and a different batch and different schools. So I think that's very important so you can strategize well.
Sorry, I was muted. I was saying, what about you, Karan? What's your one piece of advice?
So there's the cost of attendance that is provided to you by the university. Do not trust that. Do not trust that. There is so much more that is not accounted for in the cost of attendance. There are social events, there are parties, there are academic textbooks. I mean, tech that you need to buy, moving in costs, living costs. I mean, it that is that is not what you should look at. I mean, it's a rough estimate. It's a good place to start, but like Jem said, talk to students, get a rough idea about how much you need to have in your bank before
Right.
you go to business school, how much you need to maintain in your bank throughout business school, because the loans will take care of your tuition and the relevant academic and administration fees. But when it comes to the all these other components that I mentioned, you need to account a significant amount of money for that as well. So keep that in mind and check with your family. Just talk to your family, talk to your if you have relatives, financiers who you are working with, just talk to them, get their
Yeah.
opinions on how much you can spread out in terms of taking out loans and borrowing, and only then decide whether you want to go ahead with this peaceful journey.
No, that makes total sense. I think on the same note, I would say the money that you make in your internship, you have to front load your taxes. You can claim most of it back later, but they will deduct a lot of taxes, especially if you're in California. But Amrit, what's your last piece of advice?
Yeah, everything Jem and Karan said, speak to current students, know what your cost of attendance is going to look like. But I feel like this is a very personal decision. Like, it's like taking a bet on yourself. Think through your options. What do you really believe that you can go to a business school and end up in the place that you want to be? And like, if that makes sense, and if you kind of believe that, and like also look at other people's journeys and their trajectories, like generally trends don't change a whole lot over time. And yeah, like if you're comfortable, it's like taking a bet. Like, who else is gonna bet on you if not you?
Yeah, no, makes total sense. I would say just be cautious, but be cautiously optimistic. I think most MBA students don't have a lot of issues in paying back their loans. Jem, Karan, Amrit, thank you so much for signing up for the session. Amrit, Karan, if you guys have time, join us in the immigration session. I can guarantee that you'll learn something new. Jem, you don't need to do it. You're so sorted. I really, really like your story. Awesome. Thanks so much for spending some time with us, guys. Bye.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Shavik.
Shavik. Bye,
Thank